Hi, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the journaling method, the Joanna Reed's journaling method. I guess I'll call it that. I put out a video, maybe it was a year ago, about my journaling method that I created. So I started in October 2023. For some background, I made this decision that I wanted to journal my reading experiences because I was trying to compile thoughts at the end of books and with some books I would take stop and take notes, but I found this was not the most effective or efficient method for me, and so I decided I wanted to keep a daily reading journal. I love journaling. I've been journaling my entire life. So I started doing that in October 2023. And then I noticed that the just daily journaling habit was good, but it was missing something. And I realized that if I wanted it to be helpful for when I was compiling thoughts at the end of my reading experience, then a different method or approach would be more helpful. And so I started to adopt a marginalia method in which I would draw a margin in my journal and I would start to write out keywords or themes alongside my journal entries. And so I have this whole entire method in a video. If you're interested, I go in step by step detail. But I found that this marginalia method, it's been a game changer for me. It has been fantastic. There, David is showing, oh,
Well, it doesn't work.
Well,
There we go.
as
that's
long as the
crazy.
screen doesn't disappear, he's showing the method right there. So basically, you draw a margin and on the right hand side, you just write out your thoughts for the day, maybe just like one page minimum. And then afterwards, you go over what you wrote. And then in the margins, you write out the key words that come to mind when it comes to those elements. So those key words could be related to theme, they could be related to story element or narrative element, they could be related to tone or just any sort of emotional reaction that you have. It could be anything. So I have found that this again has been key for me for being able to flip back through my old journal entries, look at the keywords, and that right away sparking memory rather than just going through trying to read every single thing I wrote. So this is the method. And I love it. I still use it daily. And I decided to recruit a couple of my friends to talk about this method. So here I have Jake from Nerd Level Rising and David from Four Corners of the Page. And they have decided to take on the challenge for 1 month. They did the Joanna Reed's journal method for 1 month. And now I have questions to ask about how it went because I have no idea. I have no idea how they felt about this challenge. This was a fun experiment. So we will find out now. And so the first question to ask both of you is going to be how difficult was it to be consistent? So we're going to go ahead and start with Jake.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for enlisting me in this challenge. This was fun to do with you guys. I've been looking forward to this discussion. I think this will be really interesting. And I think that your method is awesome, by the way. Like it really is. It's not overwhelming, which this ties into my answer, by the way. It's not like an overwhelming, just takes forever kind of thing, which is helpful for like people that are busy and whatnot. But it is in depth enough to where you can get your thoughts out. But then, like you're saying, you have the margin section where you can come circle back and see the simplified version. So like it's got a lot of um, facets to it that I think are really nice. And I think that actually helped me quite a bit because the first couple weeks of this challenge, super smooth, super easy to, be consistent with it. Like it was great. And then I kind of got smacked with like some extra work stuff. And so now all of a sudden I'm just like, oh no, like I all of a sudden I had less reading time and just less time for everything. So then it sort of became a challenge to stick with it on some days just because it's like I got to get out the door, I got to whatever. So I did have a little bit of difficulty in the back half, not because of the method itself, just because of life in general. That um, to be clear, like I wouldn't have had time for any method of of journaling or note taking. Or like I didn't take, usually if I'm reading something complicated, I'll take some notes or something like that. Was kind of going out the window too, and whatever. But so yeah, I guess that's sort of my answer. That as long as life cooperated, I think it was very smooth and really easy to stick to, and I definitely feel like I got a lot out of it.
Jake,
So,
which book
yeah,
did you read?
yeah, a good question.
I was all over the place because so in October, or no, I guess this is what mostly September that we were doing this. I was all over the place, right? So not only did I get hit with all this extra life stuff, but I had like 12 buddy reads at the same time, and I'm bouncing all over the place. So I'm kind of a mixture. I have some book 2 of the Heaven Tree in here. I have some Power That Preserves in here, some Empire the Vampire, some Death of King Arthur, a couple short stories. I'm kind of all over the place. But that was also kind of nice because when I flip back through it and I'm like, I can see, like, I never feel lost, right? Like, I can, maybe it's been a few days since I read from this book, but I can just glance back at that note really quick and see, like, oh, yeah, this is exactly where I was. And it all floods right back. So, in a way, maybe that was a blessing in disguise.
Interesting. All right. Well, and I can understand, by the way, about life getting in the way. And this is interesting that I chose specifically Jake for Nerd Level Rising and David. I mean, not only are they good friends, and I wish I could say that I thought this through, but both happen to be going through extremely busy periods in their lives. Is that safe or fair to say?
So,
Yeah, I
Yeah, I think
probably
that's
chose, like, the busiest people I know right now, considering certain life transitions, things that they're doing, uh, in their jobs and lives. So, yeah, it is difficult to be consistent, but not as difficult as one might imagine, right? Because the only minimum is, like, a page a day, and you don't even have to have read a full chapter. You could do this method even if you read just a few pages a day. Sometimes that's actually a fun experiment in and of itself, is to see how much you can write about based on what you were able to read. But I'm really glad that you were able to stick it out, Jake, even though it sounds like you got so busy with work.
is what I mean, it was fun. Like, it's a nice break to think about a book for a minute and like do that. It was still very good. I'm still really, really glad that we did it. It was
Yay.
just, it got a little frantic.
I can imagine. All right. And so, David, you want to share with us, one, what you were reading when you did this challenge, but two, how difficult it was for you to be consistent, and any other general thoughts you want to add here.
Sure. So, first of all, I don't know why you were talking about my green screen. There is actually a giant book behind me with a massive kind of god-sized hand. No. And you know what? I think one thing also to say from the beginning is that this, you have enlisted us in this challenge, but we haven't been talking to each other kind of whatsoever about this challenge. You know, Joanna, we haven't communicated about it. There's been a couple of times I've almost said something and then gone like that. And Jake, I don't think we've spoken about the journaling challenge at all in our conversation. So all of this is completely fresh, which I think is really interesting. Um, I'll also say from the jump, Joanna, I don't know if I've told you this, but one of the reasons I'm very busy is I've just moved country and started at a new school. And I can't talk about the school too much because that wouldn't be fair to the pupils. But one thing I have been doing this month is asking my pupils to keep a reading journal themselves. Now, this wasn't some kind of Machiavellian me pulling the strings as kind of social experimentation. But we were trying to think of ways to get the kids to read and kind of have evidence of their reading. And I said, well, why don't we get them to write a journal and see how that goes? And so not only is it the two of us, Joanna and Jake, it's also about 100 or so young people under me who I've also got to secretly undergo this experiment, and that's been really interesting as well. Hearing how they've found it, how they've struggled with it, and how they've got positivity out of it. Now, I won't go into that too much, apart from a couple of pieces of extra evidence, but it has been really informative for me. I read 3 books, or I kind of went through 3 books while I was doing this challenge. So the first one was By Blood, by Salt by J.L. Odom. I think about 6 pages of the 30 or so were By Blood, by Salt. I also did The Death of King Arthur because that's the buddy read Jake and I are doing and going very slowly with that. And I also did the short stories of Ray Bradbury. So I'm slowly working through. Well, if I hold this up, will it work? There we go. There we go. There's Ray.
Yay.
The 100 of his best short stories. So I've read about 50 so far, and about 15 to 20 of those also made up my own personal journaling space. And I thought this was really interesting. I'm waffling, forgive me. I'm gonna persist. I thought it was very interesting to have those 3 texts as part of the journaling process because they're so different. Short fiction versus kind of relatively ancient fiction versus a contemporary indie novel, and see how those things were different from one another, and how the thinking process was different. What I will say at this juncture, in response to your original question, was the challenge. And for me, this will be the most negative answer I give you. So please don't worry when this one's slightly more negative, because the ones to come are much more positive. But I did find it a bit of a challenge personally. I was consistent. There were 2 days that I had to go back the next day and do. One, because I left it in my workplace. So I wrote it and then I literally cut it out and pasted it in my journal. And then another day, I think the day just got ahead of me and I had to fill it out the next day. But I did find myself going, like having to remind myself at the end of the day, journal, journal, journal. But I think there are two reasons for that, which are quite interesting, especially the first one, which is that I don't think I've written in pen for years. And your challenge was very specific. It was don't type, don't be on your phone, write by hand. And I only ever really write by hand when I'm marking in my work. And so I think sitting down at a surface with a pen and a blank sheet of paper and doing that process was kind of weirdly new to me, if that's not so weird to say. And the other reason was I read quite a lot on the go, right? I'll read um, wherever, literally walking, on the train, on the bus, audiobooking sometimes while playing a video game, literally on the floor, in the bath. I'll read everywhere except on a surface, like a table. And the journaling method kind of necessitated a table. And so I think that's the other reason that I began to, I always did it, but made sure that I had to stand up and head somewhere and clear a space and write. And so for the biggest challenge for me of the whole journaling process was making sure I carved out that time. When we get to the end of this discussion, I have a few kind of tips for myself on how to maybe rectify that slightly. But that was maybe the part that I had the most kind of trepidation or caution about, was making sure that I could get it done each day.
Yes, that's
Mm,
such an interesting situation as you talked about that the ways that you read are apart from the table and also about how you don't usually write by hand. That is
very
so
rarely.
fascinating to me. Is it and that's something that you have your students do, I imagine, right?
Yep. Yep. Mostly by hand. I'm quite old fashioned. Get your notebooks out and give me your first free writing response. Writing hurts. I don't know, once you've been writing for half an hour, genuinely, you've got the claw going on. And it was quite a nice timely reminder for me as a teacher of what I'm making my pupils do.
Yeah.
Jake, I don't know if you write by hand often, or if it was something that came back to you
Um,
as well.
I felt that a little bit. It sounds like maybe not quite as much as you, because I always have a notebook on my desk, so like I can jot down. Sometimes it's faster for me just to jot down some stuff rather than open up a Google Doc and type it out. But you're
Yeah.
right. Like when you write a long passage, it's just like, okay, I'm not. These muscles aren't used to this anymore. We gotta get
Yeah.
back in the swing.
I am a big believer in writing by hand because I know that there is research to support that when you write things out by hand, it reinforces memory much more. Plus, it forces you to slow down a bit more and to take in your thoughts, even though this is a concise method and something that you should ideally be able to do within 5 minutes. I do feel like there is something said about writing by hand, and it's also more personal. There's
Mm,
something about it that feels more personal. When I'm typing, I have this horrible habit of wanting to over edit everything that I write when I'm typing. And I feel like I could just be a little bit messier when I'm writing by hand. And that's also part of the purpose, too, is to feel like this is just for you. This is your journal. So for me, I feel like this is also, and I explained this in the initial video, why I feel like it's more valuable for me in some ways, even though I love the community aspect of Discord where people can share thoughts, or maybe other platforms. I know, I think Fable has some sort of online book club feature or something. There's something to be said about those kinds of ways of interacting with buddy reads, in the sense that you can type out your thoughts and use spoiler tags and interact with others, and there's value in that. But I think there's something special about being able to just process on your own and then just have your own just be one with your own thoughts,
mm.
have it be a much more intimate experience in some ways, and I feel like the handwriting is part of that personal touch, if that makes sense.
Do you religiously stick to the 5-minute cap, Joanna, or do you find yourself going on and maybe going to 10 or 15 or something like that?
Oh, yeah, I don't have a strict cap,
Mhm.
and it really depends. I find if I'm writing earlier in the day and I don't have a set time, so this is interesting because it kind of relates to habit stacking, which I know is something that's really popular in productivity circles, which means to make sure that you, if you're going to employ a new habit in your life, like a new daily habit, try to stack it on top of something that you already do every day. So, like, if you're going to brush your teeth every day, maybe that could be like you could keep your pen to your journal next to it, or your toothbrush, something like that. I don't know. That's kind of a cheesy one, but yeah, for me, I find that if I have a little bit more time and I write in the morning, I usually feel like I am able to. Sometimes I will want to expand. It depends on the book I'm reading too. So if I'm reading a book that has a lot that I want to explore, sometimes Sometimes I write more than one page, sometimes I'll write a few pages, but most of the time I find it a really good exercise mentally to see if I can bring everything together, if I can consolidate everything together that I read in one page. To me, that's like like an exercise of my mind. And also the power, by the way, in journaling is that you're reading and then you're putting things in your own words. And I think that's also a skill. It's a skill that I don't know that I've always had. So
Can I
it's what I'm trying to build. Yeah.
can I ask a follow-up question to both of you that connects to what you're saying? How heavy an emphasis of your journals, not the marginalia, but the bigger section, was summary and summary skills? How much of that percentage-wise was as you kind of paraphrasing and summarizing what you just read?
Most of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it is uh, okay. This is kind of tricky. How do I explain this? Yeah, some of it is summarizing, but at the same time, I try as best as I can to also integrate how I felt about that experience in one way or another. And sometimes that comes out in the margin. Sometimes the emotional experience comes out in the margin. There was one time I was reading Murakami's book on running, which is actually a book about writing.
I love that
It's a
book.
nonfiction book. What was
Yeah.
that?
I love that book.
Yeah, it's an excellent
Yeah.
book. And what was fascinating to me is I was journaling about it at the time, and I remember writing out a journal entry about it and then leaving the journal entry alone. And then I stopped and I thought, what did I get out of that? And I realized I didn't really reflect on how I felt about what I was reading. I just kind of wrote out just some of the major concepts he was bringing up. And so I went back and I reinserted into the margins my feelings. And by the way, you could do things like if you wanted to be really elaborate with this, which you don't have to, this is all about minimalism. But if you wanted to, you could go back and use different colored pens. So I sometimes do that. Like I'll write quotes in blue, but I decided to go back and reread my journal entry and those concepts. And I suddenly started to write out my thoughts about them. And I suddenly had this weird experience where I felt like, whoa, I actually relate to Murakami much more than I was expecting. That's not an author I would think I would have much in common with. But based on what he was saying in that book in particular, there were certain things that I found I deeply resonated with, but it took a moment of going back and re reflecting on those things. So, yeah, I think that it is helpful to add the personal touches to your journal entry in addition to, I think summarizing is a skill though, and I think that's not a bad thing either. But I think that the marginalia also offers you the option to break it down further into what's actually going on here, what is being displayed, or what are the specific techniques that you're noticing.
That's very well said. I think that seems like that's sort of what I ended up doing often was in the margins where some of that stuff, more of that stuff would come out. Like the easy example is there'd be a chapter of Sword of the Lictor that we read, right? And I would kind of summarize what happened, and then I'd have little things like that was crazy, or where is this going, or like things like that that I would jot down too. That is fun to flip back and see, and then now we can be like, oh, it went there, and so that's pretty fun.
Yeah,
Right.
sometimes I've even talked to the author in my margin. Like I remember when I was reading Wall of Storms, I wrote out in the margin, like, I know what you're doing, Ken Liu. I know what you're trying to do. So it could be fun to be playful with it too and just have fun with it. But yeah, I think that's great. The emotional piece. Great question.
Hmm.
Did you feel that way too, David? Did you find yourself summarizing more often or
So I guess the reason I bring it up, and I know this is going to bleed into other stuff that you want to ask us, but for me, I felt like my first maybe 5 or 6 days were pretty much just summary, and I was basically saying in today's reading, bada 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 bada, and I'd kind of get to the end, and then I'd have some stuff in the margins, but much more thin than what you're describing, Joanna, much less kind of interactive. And this was also in parallel with what I was kind of talking to my pupils about, my students about, where they were also saying, "Sir, in this weird," and I had given them a much even more reduced version of what we're talking about. But again, how do we step away from just regurgitating what we've been reading? Because I do think paraphrasing and summarizing is an important skill, but it's limited. It's kind of more of an academic skill than what we view as reading here on BookTube, where reading is making connections and reading is interpreting and relating and finding stuff that's resonant with you. And so this was part of my journey, which is why I wanted to ask you guys about it, because from page 1 to page 30, I feel like there's a huge difference in how I was kind of approaching this journaling challenge, to the extent that by I think day 28 or whatever it was, I just wrote, stuff happened in the book, but I need to talk about this. And it was related to By Blood, By Salt, but it was also more about the pace at which I was reading By Blood, By Salt, which for other reasons was quite slow. And it was quite liberating almost over the course of the month to go, listen, these are what my brief is from Joanna. These are my instructions. However, I'm beginning to unfurl what that kind of means for me in my context and what I need this document to be as I'm reading my particular books. So that's kind of why I brought it up, to
Yeah.
kind of that unfurling, I guess.
Well, this is going to relate to a question later on, but I find that, okay, so a lot of this is informing because I have a channel, as you two do as well. And I don't think you have to enjoy this method. You don't have to have a channel to enjoy this method or to get something out of it. But one thing that I feel like is a benefit to me when it comes to this is being able to engage more deeply in discussions. If I'm having a book discussion with somebody, if I have my journal and I can refer back to it, it's fantastic, especially if I put my emotional feelings into the book. Because, for example, I'll give you this example. I was in a live ship traders discussion with Derry and Bookborn not too long ago on Derry's channel. And Derry asked us how we felt about the character Kenneth at the beginning of the trilogy. And I was trying to remember exactly how I felt about it, and I couldn't remember, and then I opened my journal, I found the first entry I had about Kenneth, and I hope this is not a spoiler. I don't think this is a spoiler because it's, like, really the beginning of the trilogy. I put, "Kenneth sucks." It was, like, the opening of that entry was, "Kenneth sucks." So, it was like, "Oh, wow. I guess I knew right on how I felt about this character at the beginning of the trilogy." But I would have forgotten if I hadn't gone back and looked. I think. So there's something valuable in being able to, again, write out your emotional experience to what you're writing or what you're reading. But additionally, I would say that the other part of this is that I also love to talk about the books that I read on my channel in kind of like a mini review format, wrap up, if you will. And okay, I have gotten better about talking about the general gist of what the book is doing in terms of plot, but if you watch any of my older reviews, I hardly ever spend any time talking about that, and actually, I think I am pretty minimal when I talk about plot, because when I watch a review or watch somebody discussing a book, for some reason, it is the least interesting part of that review for me, is, like, what the plot was doing. It's more like the themes, the questions we're exploring, or the interesting things that the author is doing in terms of prose or tonal contrast or characterization. Like those are the things that I gravitate towards more than anything. And I find that, yeah, so I find that this summarization element is good, but I feel like it also informs it should always inform other aspects of what's going on in the story. And again, that's why
Yeah.
I find the margin so helpful. If this was a journaling method that did not have the marginalia approach, it just wouldn't be as fruitful, in my opinion, because it would be tempting to make it just summary. And then it's like, what do you get out of that? So
Yeah.
I find that, I hope that answers your question, but it is an interesting point.
It does, but can I follow this up with Jake as well? Because you're making, sorry, I don't mean to just steer us off a cliff, but I
No,
think
go
this is
ahead.
very interesting in relation to a book that Jake and I are both reading together or are attempting to read together, which is the Death of King Arthur. If you can see it through the haze, because we're both reading the
Mark
Death of King
Arthur.
Arthur,
Mhm.
and it's tough. It's tough going, and it's enjoyable, but it's
Yeah.
very much Jake's laughing.
Yeah, I read it
It
in high
it
school, I know.
it I don't know how because man, I'm really struggling and but I'm enjoying it. It's a worthwhile experience, but it feels like mountain climbing, Jake. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
I
Um
my
and
progress through the book would
yeah,
indicate
yeah,
that
yeah,
I do.
yeah. So Joanna, I'm in awe of you finishing it, especially as a teenager. Not to put teenagers down, but my question, Jake, is we're talking about comprehension and summary skills here. What were your journal entries for the Death of King Arthur when you wrote about the Death of King Arthur like? As you were
Yeah,
grappling, I hope this doesn't sound too insulting, but if you're like me, grappling to understand what's going on.
for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Actually, I found Joanna, when you were just talking, this kind of got this idea loose in my brain. I think it applies perfectly here. That you read something, right, and then I go down and I'm writing like the main portion of the entry for that day. I'm kind of thinking through. I'm like, okay, like what the heck did I just read? What just happened? and I'm trying to sort this through. And the the King Arthur ones were very rambly, because I tried to not like. Usually, when I write something like for work or whatever, I think through an outline in my head and then do it. It's just way cleaner. I tried really hard not to do that with this. I tried to just let it come out. And so those were very just like no complete sentences. It was just whatever.
Yeah.
And then towards the end, it would start to kind of coalesce a little bit more. But then what I think what I got the most out of with those in particular is now I come over to the margins and now I can sift through what I just wrote a second time, and it's much more coherent now. And so that was very helpful, especially with something that was as complicated as King Arthur is. Some of the more simple, like I read a couple of Christopher Rocchio's like Sword and Sorcery short stories that I love, but they're much more straightforward, much
Yeah.
simpler. That like I feel like I didn't get quite as much like understanding of my experience of reading it through doing like I already understood what I felt, right? Because it was more simple. But
Mhm.
something more complicated like this, or even Power That Preserves, I think was similar, especially towards the end, where having the layers of reflection was very, very helpful.
Oh, that's so interesting. And that may relate to the next question, which is, did it affect how you engaged with your reading?
I guess I sort of just answered that,
Yeah,
right?
you
Like
kinda did.
it's
Yeah, yeah.
it definitely did, especially the more complicated, and not just complicated in terms they're complicated in different ways, right? Like Death of King Arthur is complicated because of the language and the style of the narrative. It's just very different from anything that I've read, really. Whereas like one of these Rockio short stories is not so, right? It's just much more simple by design. Whereas like the Power That Preserves is much more straightforward and simple from a prose and storytelling perspective. But the themes are like you really gotta, at least I do, really have to like sit back and think through like, okay, what's going on here? And then you talk to somebody else who's smarter and they're like, oh, obviously it's this. I'm like, oh geez, yeah, you're right.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so it definitely made me more intentionally engaged in a time where I was busy enough that I wasn't just sort of naturally doing that. So it definitely was big
Oh,
thumbs up.
good, good. I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear that. I do have a response to that too, but I wanna hear David's answer to this too.
I'd be quite interested to hear your response first, if that's okay.
Oh, sure. I guess all I was going to say is I do feel like it affects how I engage with my reading. I feel like I get something out of what I read every single day, even if it's just a little bit. And here's the thing, I know that there are a lot of people who talk about reading just a little bit every day to get started with reading, but I do wonder if in a community of readers, we put pressure on ourselves to read a lot per day. I don't know if you do,
Mm.
you two do. I do wonder about that, the pressures to read a lot or whatever. But I know that for me, when I started getting into reading, I gave myself like as far as reading consistently, I should say, and getting reading fiction consistently because I went through a several year period where I just wasn't reading fiction. And when I started getting into it again, I gave myself a 5 minute, similar to this journal method in a way, I gave myself a 5 minute minimum of reading every day. I'm like, I have to read. Actually, I still have that. I still have that because every once in a while I'll have a day where things happen and not much reading gets done, but I try to get at least 5 minutes a day of reading every single day because I'm a person that I just thrive on daily habits, if that's not obvious. And so I feel like it's hard if I just do something a few times a week and that's my habit. I have a harder time being consistent than if it's something I do every single day. And I found that when I was reading 5 minutes a day, I remember during that period of time when I was getting started into reading every day, I read Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and I was surprised, especially because a lot of people would consider Name of the Wind nowadays when I hear people talk about that book. I think a lot of people consider it quote unquote slow burn. I want to say it's considered more of the slow burn variety. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I know when I was reading it and I was just reading a few pages a day, I would be surprised when I'd stop reading 5 minutes and think about what I read, how something always happened in those 5 minutes. Like, I could name things that actually happened. There's something I got out of the story that wasn't there before those 5 minutes or before those 5 pages, if you wanna put it that way.
Mm.
And I found it fascinating how much you can get out of just a tiny, tiny bit of reading every single day. I think people might underestimate that. And so I think that the journaling method, I think it just reinforces that and it makes it more powerful for me so that because it forces me to reflect. That's the thing. It forces me to reflect. So even if I've read only 5 pages a day because I'm going through a really busy season in life, if I quickly write my journal thoughts about those 5 minutes, I did that last night actually. Just read just like a few pages and then I forced myself to journal even though it was late. And I was surprised, and always surprised how much I can get out of what I read, just a few pages of literature, how much I can get out of it when I stop to reflect. So I just find it so valuable.
Do you know, I totally resonate with that because so much of my journaling was short stories, right? And
Yes.
so and I didn't vibe with every Ray Bradbury story as much as the other ones, and a lot of them I could even maybe call throwaway or gimmicky. But by reading, even these 5, 6 page short stories, and then writing some notes in the marginalia, and then finding that a lot of the marginal notes that I was writing could be transferable to other stories, sort of built this bigger spider's web tapestry, if you like, of who Ray Bradbury is as an author, what he's not, because I think some people just kind of call him a sci-fi writer who is maybe a bit of a luddite at the same time, or maybe technology phobic or something like that. And just being able to take each of these short stories as a splinter of the broader picture of who this author is, was really fun. And I don't think I would have made those connections quite as tightly if it wasn't for kind of slowing down and giving each story a little bit of writing time.
That's great. Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think short stories, if they're done well, there's going to be so much to get out of just a few paragraphs, in my opinion. So I'm not surprised. I actually have journaled short stories before. Ken Liu's The Paper Menagerie collection. I did journal my experience for each of those short stories, which was fun.
Was it different for you doing
No,
short stories versus
not
novels?
at all. Not at
Yeah.
all. Not at all. I felt like, yeah, I had no problems journaling about those or yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. I don't see why it would be, honestly. Did you find it was different, David?
I did find writing each text type, if I can call them that, different. But it was more in terms of how I was encountering the text. So when we asked about the death of King, or when I asked about the death of King Arthur, what I was really trying to say behind the scenes is a lot of my journal entries were, I think this is what's happening, and it was almost like a sense of kind of my own ongoing comprehension. That being said, at the same time, I think I did, if you don't mind me saying, folks, have some really brilliant, marvelous insights as a consequence of wading through some of that drudgery, right? Because I spent 3/4 of a page going, I think this is happening. I think this is what's going on here, and maybe that's how it connects here. The final couple of lines at the end were something that I found really, maybe not actually insightful and being a bit tongue in cheek, but something that was useful for me. So one of my last journal entries, I was talking about, I was trying to work out what the concept of knight means in the death of King Arthur. I'm like, well, sometimes knights are people who are almost like, it's a title given by a king. And what king means seems to be quite fuzzy as well. But there are also rogue knights, and there are kind of adventurers who are called knights, and there are villains who are knights. I'm like, what does knight mean? Can a knighthood be revoked? And I was writing all these thoughts down. And then at the very, maybe this isn't as insightful as I think it is. But the last thing I wrote on that journal day was that kind of sounds like the biblical concept of salvation. What does it mean to be saved? Can salvation be revoked? And obviously, Mallory writing in a very heavily Christian time, having those two concepts, those two terms sort of linked together and braided together in my mind, gave me a little bit more of a platform with which I could chew through the story and continue to explore it. So I found that in terms of kind of engaging with my own comprehension. One other thing that I did notice, when the story was tougher, not prose, but my writing style got a lot more simple. And when I was reading something a lot more simple, as Bradbury sometimes is, though not always, my prose got a lot more, or my writing got a lot more purple, which I thought was quite interesting. I don't know why my writing style seemed to change depending on which text type I was doing. And one
That
more thing,
is so
yeah,
fascinating. Wow.
yeah. I was just noticing that when I was reading through it this evening, actually. And then one more thing, maybe I can add in very, very quickly, is it made me a lot more. Oh, two more things. One thing, I was making a lot of connections, which I wasn't expecting, connecting to my own memories, connecting to video games and things like that. And another thing that I was noticing about my writing experience is it made me a lot more candid and honest with myself about my understanding. And this kind of connects to what I was just saying about the death of King Arthur, but it was more about Ray Bradbury, where I'd be finishing a Ray Bradbury story and very often going, I'm not sure what tone this is. I'm not sure what mood this is. Are we supposed to be taking this sarcastically? Are we supposed to be taking this, what's the word, seriously? Are we supposed to be taking this with emotion or with humor? And often I'd finish these Ray Bradbury stories and not quite sure how the story was supposed to land. And maybe a Ray Bradbury enthusiast would say that's kind of the point, or they'd just call me a bad reader. But again, that ongoing, honest engagement with myself. Because very often we finish a book and we like, well, yes, I understood that, moving on. But having to sit with it for a minute and actually articulate the level at which I got something or didn't get something was very, very interesting to me.
This was so fascinating.
Yeah.
So one, it sounds to me like you're engaging in some higher order thinking skills with your
Mm.
writing. You're synthesizing all these different themes across the story or concepts or symbols. And when you were talking about the night and salvation, and then you were talking about this, and then this might connect with this. So you're not only engaging in higher order thinking skills, you're also asking critical thinking questions too about the tone and about what's going on. Yeah, it sounds like you're engaging in some great critical thinking as a result of this. And now, as far as your handwriting is concerned, I have no idea what that's about. I now want to go over my handwriting when it comes to some of the books I've read and see if that's changed because I
Just,
do vary quite a bit when it comes to sloppiness and writing
but just,
legibly.
just to
Go ahead.
clarify that, Joanna, I didn't mean that my handwriting got worse. I mean the style of writing changed.
Oh,
So when I was writing about the death of King Arthur, I was writing stuff like, I don't know what's going on here, man. Whereas if it was maybe an easier Ray Bradbury story or maybe J.L. Odom, I'd write something like, oh, and the use of metaphor here very much accentuates the bit, 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 bit. But it's almost like reading something more complex made me chill out a little bit and be a bit more honest and forthright. That's kind of what I
oh,
meant by that.
fascinating.
Yeah,
I need to check the same as well.
yeah.
I need to check if I do the same as well. That's so interesting.
It's like I stopped pretending almost. Would that be fair? Maybe.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is way too deep.
I feel like this relate. You just basically answered. I think you answered this question, which was my next question, which is, do you remember more details?
Do you know, I love what you said about your response to Derry and Bookborn in that discussion, which I loved, by the way. That was a really fabulous discussion.
Mm.
And even if you didn't remember it, you still gave yourself the tools through which you could go back and recall. So I do think I had more. And just looking through the stories I didn't journal about, I don't think I remember them as well necessarily. But at the same time, even if my memory was dodgy either way, I still have given myself a resource, which I think is a very
Mm.
positive thing.
Yes, the resource is so amazing. I
Yeah.
have to add because my goodness, like my journal just randomly opened to the 54% mark of Madship because I read that on an ebook, so I had the percentages available. But my goodness, like I can look at exactly how I felt at the halfway point of that book. Yeah, and I wrote something about like interesting to compare how this character is trying to coerce this character to do this, and so it's just like I would have those little details. Like they're there if I want to go back and see in addition to the marginalia notes too, and some of the main themes I was picking out at that point. So the resource aspect, oh my gosh, it cannot be
Mm.
underestimated in my opinion. I have gone through because I now have these are two journals I have filled out completely since I started doing this technique. And it's just fantastic that I can go back and read those things because if you ask me about any book before I started this method, I wouldn't be able to talk about it. But Jake, what about you? Any response to any of this stuff, or also answered the question about details and memory?
Yeah, I have a quick response to one of the things David said, and then I definitely want to talk about that. You were talking about how you sort of are forced to be more honest with yourself and your comprehension level. That really resonates with me. That's one of the main things that humbled me in grad school. Is you start like my grad school program is very research heavy, right? And so you start trying to talk about these studies and you very quickly find out that you don't actually understand what you thought you read. And even when you get a little bit deeper and you're like, okay, now I think I understand this, and then someone will be like, oh, actually, because of X, Y, and Z reasons, they just did the whole thing wrong, so it's kind of not that useful anyway. I'm just like, oh, well, I didn't know that. So you're constantly confronted with not knowing what you think that you knew.
Oh,
And one of the things that I learned is number one, that that's actually a very good thing that you're forced to
mhm,
grow a lot. And
mhm.
number two, we would do like a journal club where we have a research paper and we all read it and then we're going to talk about it. And then we might have a similar paper later and we kind of compare and contrast and maybe they have opposing findings and whatever. And this connects back to this, I promise. One of the things that I learned through this process, or through defending my master's thesis or doing my doctoral proposal, where it's like you don't actually understand something unless you can explain it in simple terms to somebody who hasn't been exposed to it. And if it's something with opposing viewpoints, you probably don't really understand it unless you can also argue the other viewpoint effectively in simple terms. And
Mm.
so, like, when I think about that, like, that connects so much to what you're saying with this, David. Like, we go through this process, and I'm writing down what I think I knew about these chapters or whatever of this story, and then I very quickly realized, like, I thought I knew what happened, but I actually don't, and I don't even really know how I felt about it. So then you go through again those sort of two layers of reflection, and then it starts to come together, and it's a very satisfying feeling.
Can I jump in very quickly? Did you do any journaling on Gene Wolfe? Because that sounds like a lot
A little
about
bit.
how people experience Gene Wolfe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That and King Arthur were probably the two that I had the most of that experience. We actually had a sort of a third layer of it with Gene Wolfe, because Joanna and I would talk about it sort of
Yeah.
chapter by chapter. So it was even more so that whole, like, I would share. There was a handful of times where I would be like, "Man, this was so crazy that this happened," and Joanna would be like, "Oh, I read that totally differently. It was this," and it made me go back and reread it. And usually I'd be like, "Oh, she was right," but um,
Well, you caught so many things though too, Jake. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I found, it's interesting because we buddy read The Claw of the Conciliator daily, doing a daily chapter, and then we did the same with Sword of the Lictor. I am guilty in that I did not journal my experience of The Claw of the Conciliator. I was journaling other books I was reading at the time, but not that one. And I just relied on my daily conversations with Jake to get me through that. And it was wonderful. And it worked obviously to do that, help to do that, but I regret that I did not journal my experience of that book. I regret it so much. I feel like it would have been really valuable to have those daily journal notes to go back to. Fortunately, I still have our conversations I can go back to. And Jake very kindly shared with me his notes, but my goodness, like I felt like it was just a totally different experience to read Wolf, to do the daily journaling method and have those conversations with Jake. So yeah, it was definitely doubly reinforced. Jake, I love what you shared about your research experience and thinking you understood the paper and then learning differently and then learning, oh, well, actually, they did the methodology maybe all wrong or whatever. And so disregard this paper, or let's look at this paper, but let's look at another one that has opposing findings, and the ability to be able to explain it in simple language. I love that so much. I couldn't agree more with that. Mhm.
it's sort of necessary too in my field, right? 'Cause so much of because I work in, like, very applied, hands-on, uh, typically with, like, lifting weights or fat loss or whatever. And so when we're trying to explain, it's a really weird field, by the way. In no other field of science are the actual researchers on social media talking about their studies to the people who are trying to put it into practice in their daily life. Like, it's so weird. But now when I do that, I have to, like, I can't say all these terms because people don't know what it means, and they're not it's not actually useful then to them, right? So you have to be able to give them actually useful information while at the same time having scientific integrity, and like, not, it's a really weird, complicated skill that I'm still not perfect at, but certainly have gotten a lot of practice over the last 5 years or whatever.
The echoes that are going on in my thoughts to take it out of the PhD realm and into the 5-year-old realm. It's very much very much echoes of what you guys are saying is what I encounter with my kids, because it's that same thing. Like, what was it? My son asked me to explain. What's a black hole, Dada? What's a black hole? Explain to me what a black hole is. How? And you have to take all this information that you have from, I guess, a higher plane, if you like, and then they crunch it down in a way that's both accessible, but you're not removing the truth of what you're saying. You have to keep that element of truth, and it's such a challenge. So it's just interesting hearing you guys talk and maybe
And
relating it to a slightly different area.
shout out to
Oh,
David's
yeah.
video of explaining Malazan to a preschooler. It's
I'm
just
so excited to watch that. I'm
you
so
have to watch
excited.
it. It is
Jake,
the best.
sorry, Jake, I'm worried that I cut you off halfway through your thoughts when I asked you about Gene Wolfe. Did you get to everything you wanted to say?
I think so. I think I didn't answer your question, John, about the remembering more details, right? That definitely, yes. Definitely remember a lot more things through that reflection. I think particularly having to reflect multiple times to do this was very, very helpful. And I certainly find, like, actually a really interesting example is, I mentioned Rocchio's Sword and Sorcery short stories. He has 4 of them are out. There's a 5th one coming out in December that I was very fortunate to get an advanced copy of. That I think I journaled about 3 of them, and the other 2 I didn't. And the 3 that I journaled about, I remember much more clearly in my brain. So even like a short, more straightforward story like that, it definitely makes a difference, let alone in a more complicated, full-length novel and all that kind of thing. Definitely
Ah,
helpful.
good. I'm so glad to hear that. And the next question, did it affect ways of talking about the books on camera, such as reading updates, book discussions, etc.? I don't know if this applies as much to David as it would to Jake, because I know Jake does the ongoing weekly updates on his channel and he does wrap ups. Whereas David's channel has fantastic content. Everybody needs to check out both of these channels, of course. But I think that David's his approach is a little different on BookTube in terms of discussing recent reads.
The key rules to my channel are lethargy and laziness and inconsistency. Is what you're trying to say. No, I think I'll recuse myself from this question a little bit. In fact, Joanna, this is what a good friend I am. I am going to try and make a video on Ray Bradbury and the 50 stories I've read, but I thought I'd do that after this discussion because I wanted to bring the fresh thoughts here first. So the truth is, I have very little to say here for once. So I'm happy to pass this over.
I, I think what I will say too is that I think David's videos are actually better than mine because I can just be like, I read this and it was cool. Whereas
You don't have
David
to make
has to
edits. You can just
formulate
talk. It's amazing, Jake.
That's
a lot
so
of
not
practice.
true too, Jake. You always bring up so many insights in your
Yeah.
videos.
Thank
So
you.
yeah.
Thank you. This definitely was helpful though. I think the one that sticks out in my memory the most where this helped was probably that last Thomas Covenant book where I had such high hopes for it coming into it. I felt like on my channel when I read Lord Falsbane book 1, I didn't do an amazing job talking about it initially. I think like the 3rd time around where I came back to it, I was like, okay, I felt like I shared some thoughts that were worthwhile. Book 2, I think I did a much better job. But then book 3, I was like, I want to do a really good job with this. Because especially once I got to the end, it hit me really hard. And I think having these journal entries that I could flip back through and see like some of those emotional milestones isn't the right term, but like these different points along the book, I was like, oh, I was feeling this. And then some other stuff happened. And then now I'm feeling this way. And like just seeing that evolution across it, I think was helpful with like getting my head wrapped around the arc, not just that book, but like how it connected back to books 1 and 2. And I felt much more comfortable being able to describe that with pretty minimal upfront effort. Like I don't prepare for those, right? I have a Google Doc on my laptop that says talk about power that preserves. That's all I do. And so that served me much better, I think, here rather than when I tried to do Lord Falsbane months ago. So definitely think that this helped quite a bit, particularly with like synthesizing everything together.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm glad that it was helpful for that because I was so curious about that as well, about how that might have affected your journey. And I mean, I think you've been speaking so well about Donaldson's works because I am so eager to read Donaldson now because largely because of your channel.
Oh,
So it's definitely one of like the top authors I want to get to in 2026. So we'll get to the last question, which is probably going to break my heart, but I have to ask it, which is have you continued since the challenge ended? Because we only committed to 30 days, or these two only committed to 30 days. Maybe I should have asked this earlier so we wouldn't end on such a sad note because I know you two are busy. But anyone want to answer this first?
Don't
I
go breaking my heart. I couldn't if I tried. Sorry. I so the short answer is no, but it's much more complicated than that, and I don't want to break your heart. So let me explain. So the way I'm saying this, Joanna, okay, is that the journaling is a template, right? The marginalia method is a template through which we can access higher order thinking skills, and we can engage more fully with the text that we are reading. And from that perspective, I had a wonderful time and genuinely found it very fruitful and engaging. This sounds like I'm about to say but it's not really a but, it's a but and. Because will I be continuing in the exact form that you have articulated, which is handwritten, which is almost paragraphed form marginalia. I think if I tried to continue that consistently, I would begin to fall apart. I could see myself as the weeks go on missing a day and then missing 2 days, and suddenly it starts to crumble. And I don't want that. I would hate to try and overreach and then not have that work for me. But I am going to adapt it. I think my plan is to take the template that you've given and maybe give it my own kind of David stamp. And so I think what I'm going to do going forward for certain texts, and I think it works better for me personally for other texts than others. So for example, By Blood, By Salt, I'm not sure if I would have landed on most of my thoughts organically. But for stuff like The Death of King Arthur, it was definitely useful. And I think Ray Bradbury is sort of a middle ground case. So my plan going forward is when I'm approaching a text or maybe a new series that I think would require this method, Gene Wolfe sounds like a really good example, I will do it. But this is where I'm worried I'm going to break your heart. I think I'm going to do it digitally. I think I'll do it on a Google Doc and then print and annotate would probably be the way I would do it. So maybe the bulk of writing, the summary stuff is typed up. And then if I can have access to a printer, I could then do the marginalia almost as comments on the side. And so that's the way that I can see myself using the technique and what you have implemented, put my own stamp on it and still continue to get the fruit out of it that I would want to, while being able to kind of stay on course. I would also add that there's 100 children somewhere doing your journal method. So there's definitely some continuation with the physical journal.
They're not doing the marginalia though, right? They're just journaling.
No,
Is that
we
correct?
gave them we gave them a few examples, but it's currently just prose form. But we have also taught them annotation, so annotating your own journal is part of it too. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay, cool.
yeah.
Very cool. Okay, well, thank you for answering honestly. And I do appreciate that you're taking your own approach with it for purposes that are just fitting to your lifestyle. So
Did I break your heart?
only a little bit.
Okay.
All right,
Well,
Jake.
hopefully I can be slightly better. I would say I've paused is what I will say, and that's only because as you both know, I am drowning in work stuff right now,
Yeah.
and so it's like I'm literally reading like 10 to 20 pages a day, which is not great for keeping up with buddy read schedules, might I add, but I'm doing my best. I'm not taking notes, like it's just a little bit of reading for mental sanity and then get back to filling out application stuff. But I do very much want to come back to this because I think that it's a great method that doesn't take a ton of time, and like we've been talking about, there's so much value there. And so that's kind of my okay, to share one other external booktube thing that I think helps kind of describe this feeling that I have around it. So my bodybuilding coach, funny enough, is I chose him because he's primarily he knows all of the stuff, but his sort of specialty is the more emotional and philosophical side to everything. That's sort of what he's known for in the industry. And he's given me so many just like nuggets of wisdom over the years, which is crazy. So basically, one of the most recent thing that he did was we were talking about like just how busy I am and like how crazy the schedule is, and
Mhm.
how sometimes I feel like I'm trying to do too much, and all of a sudden it's hard to get to the gym and do all these things. And uh, he's always so nonchalant with it, which is so funny. Like he doesn't realize how insightful he is sometimes. But he was just like, he's like, bro, you got to increase your no to make this a bigger yes. And I was just like, damn, that's good, right? Like, so that's sort of becoming one of the things that I'd like to do with my life once I get through this job application thing, is see where can I streamline some stuff and increase my no to some things that like don't really serve me a ton, to increase my yes in the things that I care about most. And so one of those things will of course continue to be reading and booktube and all these things. And I think something that helps a lot with me getting more value out of that, just for myself personally, even if I don't tell anybody about it, but also for discussions and all, talking about it on camera, whatever, is this journaling thing. So that's sort of where I'm at with it, is that I'm on pause right now while life is pure chaos. But I definitely want to come back to it and have it be a thing that I can, even if I don't get it every single day, I want to at least do my best with it, because it's certainly it's helpful, like we've talked about.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. That definitely didn't break my heart. So thank you.
See, David, I won.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much from the bottom of my heart, by the bottom of my broken heart. I'm just joking. Um, I want to thank both of you so much for taking on this challenge, for allowing me to recruit you, and for sharing your experiences with me. It's been so much fun and so insightful. And I just appreciate both of you too so, so much. So thank you again.
Well, can I say that it was a real joy to do this and seeing what the journaling method's all about. So yeah, more than grateful to be on.
Just appreciate you too again so, so much. So, again, these two channels will be linked in the description below. And thank you all so much for watching. Please let me know in the comment section below if you've ever done this journaling method or if you're interested in it. Thanks again. Bye.